Master Splinter's design is pretty racist. Now, out of the gate, that sounds really harsh, and I'd like to preface this just in case you've never seen one of my videos before. I like TMNT, and I like Master Splinter, most of the time. My feelings over how Splinter gets portrayed are somewhat complicated, but my criticism is coming from the perspective of a fan. Originally, I wanted to put a condensed version of this discussion into an In Defense of Splinter video, where I just talk for a really long time about why I like Rise Splinter the most, but I've been hearing this topic get brought up more and more and decided to just split these into two. This is going to be a bit different from my other videos, but I feel like this is still an important topic that isn't often discussed in depth. Now, I'm not saying that the creators are racist or malicious in their designs. I'm not here to tell you why you're not allowed to like the Ninja Turtles anymore, and I'm not here to tell you you're a bad person if you like the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. What I am here to tell you is that even if we like something, it's still important to understand why characters like this exist, and why they're a bit of a slap in the face to the East and Southeast Asian audience, even if that's not the intention of the creators. And how Splinter's depiction in many portrayals of Asian people in a lot of Western media usually range from acceptably ignorant to actively harmful. The pushback against stereotypes and biases against East and Southeast Asian people has only recently become a mainstream topic, but anti-Asian racism goes a lot further back than 2020 and is still widely misunderstood. So before we can really understand the problems with Splinter, we have to first understand where the Asian community's criticisms are coming from. To do that, we're gonna have to go back a bit. Or a lot of it. In the late 18th century, yes, we are going that far back, but I'm going to speedrun it. The concept of Orientalism emerged from European scholars studying what would come to be known as the Orient. This field of study initially focused on the Middle East, North African, and West Asian territories, but over time it came to encompass all of Asia, while Europe, Australia, and North America came to be known as its opposing Western world of the Occident. Orientalism was built on the foundations of white supremacy. The Western world was inherently more advanced, civilized, and superior in every way to the East, while the savage Eastern world was a danger to the West's sanctity, filled with alluring mystery, sex, and exotic treasures beyond imagination. It relied on the othering of Eastern cultures by interpreting and studying them from the perspective of an outsider. And even as the cultures in the Eastern world developed and changed, European Orientalism treated them as the unchanging Near East and Far East, and the countries identified in each became nearly indistinguishable from one another. Eventually, we became monoliths. Faceless and static, more fairy tales than people. Over time, this concept evolved into the Yellow Peril, the Western world's fear that the Far East would band together and conquer and enslave the West. In the US, widespread hatred, fear, and resentment for East and Southeast Asian people grew, and a couple of immigration bans later, the Asian population in the US came to a screeching halt, and anti-Asian sentiments were in full swing with laws preventing entrance or naturalization to the US by East and Southeast Asian people, until 1952 when these laws were lifted. Keep in mind that this is a vast oversimplification of these events because there's just no way for me to fully explain all anti-Asian racism ever, and I think if I tried, I would go insane. So let's fast forward a little and touch on how this anti-Asian mindset affected how Asian people came to be portrayed in Western media, which came to affect how we get characters like Splinter. Now, some of you might be saying, but we have a bunch of Asian stuff now. There's Avatar: The Last Airbender, everyone loves anime now, and I saw Crazy Rich Asians. And that's great, but Asian representation in Western media has always been questionable. Because of the muddling of identities from things like Orientalism and the Yellow Peril, portrayals of Asian cultures have a hard time being accurate and positive at the same time. Sometimes they don't even have to have Asian people in the movie at all. Let's take The King and I, for example. This is one of my personal favorite Golden Era Hollywood films, but this story is supposed to be set in Thailand about a Thai royal family. That's a white dude. This story also centers around the Orientalist mindset of the backward thinking and undeveloped culture of the Thai characters needing to be educated and brought into modern civilization by an English white woman. Here's a more modern example that we see in two Disney films, technically four, Aladdin and Mulan and their respective live-action remakes. In both stories, the leads are oppressed in a culture that is portrayed as women-hating, backward, and antagonistic, and only once these women break out of their traditions and cultural expectations do they find freedom. The cultural identity in Aladdin is muddled with the could-be-anywhere city of Agrabah being a mix of Arabic and Indian cultural markers, because I guess those are interchangeable now, while Mulan has a lot of cultural inaccuracies that make the East Asian audience go, wait, and talks way too much about honor, just like every other Asian-inspired story. And these problems aren't fixed in their remakes either. I'd actually argue that they're worse, which is kind of impressive, if nothing else. And a side note, but do you guys remember this scene from Mulan 2?
No escorts, no manners, no nursemaids, no worries, no hands folded perfect, like holding a lily.
Nice. Now, a story like this isn't inherently bad either. At their roots, these stories are trying to be about feminism. But when a story centered around a marginalized group featuring a culture that has historically been referred to almost exclusively in a negative light, with the biggest criticism of that culture being about systemic misogyny, and you give that story not to the people affected by said system, but instead to the people who have perpetuated that negative stereotype and benefited from it. It's a recurring theme that Asian people can't be trusted to create and tell our own stories without supervision, or that we aren't a priority when deciding who should get to portray these stories to the public. And we can't even use the excuse that this mindset is old and outdated and no one does this stuff anymore, because so many things are created with the Asian aesthetic while pushing Asian people to the side. We have Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra, written by white dudes, and only 2 of the main cast were Asian, which eventually went down to 1. American Dragon: Jake Long, also written by a white dude, with only 2 Asian main cast members. Detention Air, which had a Korean main character with Cho Chang syndrome, written by white people. Randy Cunningham, 9th Grade Ninja, where the villain looks like this and was written by white people. Aloha in 2015, Doctor Strange in 2016, Death Note in 2017, Ghost in the Shell in 2017, Whatever Was Happening with Emily in Paris in 2020, Raya and the Last Dragon in 2021. Are you guys seeing a pattern? Okay, you know what? I'm not going to get into this because if I just start naming off Asian themed stuff I don't like, I'm going to be here all day. Because of this lack of priority in Asian portrayals and centuries of anti-Asian sentiments filtering through the West, much of what should be considered racist, insensitive, or at the very least not your lane to be in, gets ignored because who cares? It looks cool, doesn't it? Accuracy doesn't matter as much as how exciting the story or the action is. And with time, the identities, cultural significance, historical racism, and the defining lines between each of those things blurs. What we're left with is the vague shape of maybe don't do this.
Like rabbits, because you can pull their ears back and make them look like Asian people. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na.
Give me Kyla! Give me Redis!
But everything else is fair game, no matter who it hurts. So before I break down what's wrong with Splinter, I'd like to reiterate, I don't think the original creators of TMNT or any creators of the subsequent reboots are intentionally perpetuating stereotypes. I think this is more of a lack of foresight, and some versions are trying a little harder than others to work with what they've got. There are problems with every version of Splinter, in every version of TMNT. And even though the discussion around his problematic portrayal is mostly centered around Rise now, I think it's important to realize that TMNT has never really been a clean source of representation for Asian people, even though it might feel like that on the surface. For starters, let's address the very foundations that TMNT is built on. Ninjas. This isn't that surprising, since ninjas were huge in the 80s following the craze for East Asian martial arts films in the 70s. But TMNT builds its identity largely on the fact that its Asian characters are all ninjas who can bust out some quick moves at any moment. Even Venus is a ninja. She's Chinese. But it's not just being a ninja master that makes Splinter stand out so much. It also has a lot to do with the way he's written and characterized with the stoic Japanese man stereotype. A cold but caring sensei who loves his sons but is stern and talks a lot about duty, honor, and discipline. He eats, sleeps, lives, and breathes ninjutsu. And while that might make sense narratively, it doesn't mean it's not a story we haven't heard a million times. It's kind of exhausting how this often becomes the foundation for his character, just like every other East Asian man that gets put on the screen. And while it may seem cool in a movie, these characters pigeonhole Asian actors into having to play the same characters or the same stories over and over and over again for non-Asian audience enjoyment. While it's not surprising that the creators would design this type of mentor character, since the mentor is usually an old, wise teacher to the young heroes, the fact that nearly every Asian mentor is a tea-drinking ninja master with a deep, rough voice and speaks in riddles and preaches about virtue? Meh. I think the most egregious display of this stereotype is in the 2014 movie where the lore is changed so that Splinter and the Turtles were the results of human experimentation. This wouldn't even be so bad if the scientists creating them weren't a couple of American white guys. Why did Splinter learn martial arts through a stinky sewer boat? Why does he have a Japanese accent now? Why is he so culturally Japanese? Why does he look like this? Because where those things come from, and why those things are significant to a character or a story doesn't matter as long as it looks cool. That brings up something else too. The ones playing Splinter. Splinter falls into the trap that a lot of Asian characters do. Asian people aren't the ones playing him. I mean, Asian people haven't really been playing much of anyone in this franchise other than the Shredder and Leonardo in that first live-action movie, but I think out of all of the characters, Splinter and Shredder are the bare minimum of who should be cast with Asian actors, and sometimes we can't even get that. And I'll give credit where it's due. I do at least appreciate that Rise cast a minority main cast with 3 black actors, 2 Jewish actors, and 1 Asian actor, since the theme around TMNT fits marginalized people better than anything else. The Turtles being non-Asian doesn't bother me as much here because at least it's other largely underrepresented groups getting to play these characters. And with a franchise that borrows from black pop culture as much as TMNT does, I'm at least glad that the majority of the cast can help reflect that. But up until very recently, as in the last 2 versions of him recently, Splinter was almost exclusively played by non-Asian actors. From his CGI motion capture actors to his voice actors over the decades of portrayals, out of the 13 men playing him in the television series and the movies, only 3 of his actors were Asian, and out of those, only 1 was Japanese. And that has a little asterisk next to it because that actor was Mako Iwamatsu, who you might recognize as the voice of Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Unfortunately, Mako passed away during the production of the 2000 TMNT film and had to be replaced. And guess who they picked to replace him? If you guessed a white guy, you would be right. And okay, I get that this was an extraordinary circumstance and it would feel wrong to scrap Mako's final role and just re-record all of his lines with someone else to make the movie sound more cohesive, but I don't know if it's much better to give all of Mako's roles to a white man who's just putting on an accent the entire time. Sure, Greg Baldwin sounds enough like him, but you're telling me that the person who gets to pick up the legacy of an icon of Asian American representation in Hollywood is this guy? Sure. Whatever. I guess at this point I'm just happy we're even casting Asian people in this role at all, even if they aren't Japanese. It's a little annoying how Asian roles get treated as a sort of whatever's good role where any Asian is good enough, because then we run into issues like in Raya and the Last Dragon, which was supposed to be about Southeast Asian cultures, but they cast an East Asian comedian to play a revered god. But this is more than we usually get, so I guess I can't complain too much about that. So here's where the biggest issue with Splinter is, and usually this goes under everyone but the Asian audience's nose. Splinter is a rat. Rat is a slur used against East and Southeast Asian people, especially Chinese and Japanese people. During the Age of the Yellow Peril, it was used to liken East and Southeast Asian immigrants to disease-ridden pests that needed to be flushed out or devious, sneaky characters that couldn't be trusted. This imagery was also popular during World War II to represent Japanese soldiers as weak, feeble-minded animals. Asian people were often depicted using rat-like features as well, like small, squinting eyes, buck teeth, a short, hunched stature, long, ungroomed nails, long, tied-back hair nicknamed the rat tail, or some kind of ominous expression. As a fan, I try to give TMNT the benefit of the doubt. There are plenty of logical reasons why Splinter is a rat, whether he was human first or not. Rats are common in New York, sure. Let's mutate him into a rat. Or he's the pet of a Japanese man. Makes sense why he'd be culturally a Japanese rat man. But regardless of the reason, a lot of fans take issue with Rise Splinter's design because it toes the line of a racial caricature a little too close for comfort. Especially in scenes like in the Layer games where Splinter is shaved down and looks weirdly human, or in the flashback sequences when he's still somewhere between a human and a rat. I also understand that there's only so much the new writers and new designers can do without completely deviating from the source material and creating either a completely unrecognizable character by changing his mutation, or erasing a major plot point by keeping him human. Unfortunately, the Rat Ninja Master Splinter is one of the most iconic staples of TMNT, and to some degree, I understand why they wouldn't change his core design. I think that when creating Splinter's redesign for Rise, the crew was more focused on creating a Splinter that would just be the complete opposite of the 2012 Splinter, especially since Aunt Ward worked on the 2012 version before going to work on Rise. Where 2012 Splinter is tall, sharp-featured, graceful, and poised, Rise's Splinter is short, rounded, uncouth, and lacks conviction. In trying to juxtapose these two Splinters, one ended up resembling a caricature, while the other more closely embodied a character stereotype. However, while I can make excuses all day about why Splinter being a rat can be somewhat justified, there is something in Rise that I simply can't fathom an excuse for. The belief that Asian people eat bizarre and disgusting things goes as far back as this slur, when it was popularly believed that Asian immigrants ate rats, which led to ads like this one for rat poison showing a Chinese man. I hope I don't have to describe what this image is implying, you get the idea. Harmful stereotypes like this haven't really died out either, if the spike in anti-Asian racism since 2020 is anything to go by, and it most certainly is not restricted to only Chinese people, which makes scenes like this—
We were hunted, we lived in caves, we ate leaves and rats. No offense.
None taken, we are delicious.
sound very different to the Asian audience, and makes the writing team seem appallingly tone-deaf. When I first heard this scene, my jaw dropped. It felt like a slap in the face. And like I said, I don't think this is a malicious act by the team, just a lack of foresight. And hindsight, I guess. But the bottom line is that the ignorance and lighthearted intention of this joke doesn't matter when Asian people die for sentiments dangerously close to this. It's sad how easily these get passed off as lighthearted jokes at the expense of the people who are supposed to feel seen. Like I said though, I'm not here to tell you why you're not allowed to like the Ninja Turtles anymore, or why you shouldn't draw Splinter anymore, or what have you. There are still a lot of really good things about Splinter, especially in the newer versions like in the 2012 series and Rise, where his portrayal as a first-generation Asian American actually holds a lot of weight in his development as an individual and as a father. I really like the way that the emotional impact of his mutation plays a bigger part in these versions, and I like that Rise began to indulge in the idea of a much less mature version of the composed sensei we've come to know. I plan to expand my thoughts on Rise's Splinter and how I actually think he's one of the better versions of Splinter in a separate video, so I won't go too far into him right now, but I don't want to end this video on a low note either. With the issues bogging him down and the low-key racist undertones around his character, I think the best thing the new versions can do is try to break out of the mold that's been built around him. Emphasize his struggles, his role in the story, his characterization, make Splinter feel like more than a ninja master Ratman. Let him connect to the audience he was supposed to this entire time. I think, despite the grievances, we are finally heading in that direction. And even with all this behind him, I still really love Master Splinter, and I want other fans to keep loving Master Splinter too. The only thing I can really ask for is recognition for what it took to get here, and what it left behind. That you don't forget about us, because we're still here. We're still fighting to be seen as more than this.